Super Mario Bros. Wonder is filled to the brim with new game mechanics, gimmicks, and just so much content that wasn't included in any other Mario game prior. Even though this game had a ton of content at launch, there was still a lot of it that never made it into the final cut. Today, we're talking about the Super Mario Bros. Wonder beta, and surprisingly, this early build of the game has a ton of differences compared to the final release. Different UI, different character designs, unused power-ups, unused abilities, and so much more are present in this beta version of the game. So let's just get into it. But before we get into the meat of this thing, I should probably mention where all of this stuff is coming from. Well, in late March of this year, developers Takashi Tezuka and Shiro Mori held a panel at this year's Game Developers Conference, or GDC. In this 1-hour presentation, the two talked about the development of Super Mario Bros. Wonder. And in this presentation, they also showed off some very early beta footage of the game. So let's see what we got here. While it may not seem like much on the surface, this thing has a lot of differences compared to the final game. The obvious one I can point out is that there isn't a background. There isn't an environment whatsoever. This is understandable because it is very unfinished, but I don't know, I find it kind of charming to be quite honest. The simplicity reminds me of the NES Mario games in a sense. Just a blank background with some flat terrain to run on is all that's here. So I guess in a way, Mario Wonder was built off of the concepts that were presented in those games. It's just kind of cool how that whole thing comes full circle. We can also see differences in the UI. We can still see counters for coins, purple coins, and lives, but we also have a counter for these gem things. If I had to guess, these are probably placeholders for the Wonder Seeds, but it's still interesting how there's a numerical counter for them. But other than that, we have the usual spots where the 10 coins would go, but we also have a spot to presumably track if you hit the top of the flagpole or not. In this case, I can see why this was removed from the final game. You could already see this on the world map, so why would you need to see it in the level as well? But other than that, the UI is clearly unfinished, which is understandable because if I had to guess, the UI is probably one of the last things developers worry about during development. Everything is just standard white text and straight lines. There's no style, so I'm glad that the UI was improved in the final version. Speaking of design differences, Mario's model looks completely different from how it looks in the final game. His proportions are much larger in the beta. He's got a big head and everything. In fact, he looks very similar to how he was designed in the box art from back in the 80s and 90s. I'm honestly a big fan of this design, but its removal does raise some questions. I can understand why they scrapped this design in favor of a more traditional modern Mario design, but if they truly had the creative freedom with this game, then why would they do that? Why not change it up a little bit? In my opinion, this Mario design could have had much more potential when it comes to the animation and expression of the characters in Mario Wonder. I mean, they look great in the final game, don't get me wrong, but considering how wacky this game is, I think this would have been a cool thing to keep, but it's whatever. Gameplay-wise, the only noticeable differences have to do with the Wonder effects. The Wonder Flower is not here, but it is in spirit. Its placeholder is just a black blob with a question mark. Yet again, this is just more unfinished content. I can entirely see why the Wonder Flower itself isn't here yet, because again, the game was in its very early stages. When you collect it, the whole screen turns black for a second, whereas in the original game, it transitions to the background of the Wonder effect. But something that was just outright removed from the final game, however, is that when you collect the Wonder Flower in the beta, there's a voice clip of somebody shouting, I can definitely see why this was removed though, because admittedly, it is kind of distracting and a tad bit annoying, but anyway, let's move on. The footage we have shows two different Wonder effects, one that is seen in the final game and one that was scrapped. Let's start with the one seen in the final game. This Wonder effect is seemingly an early variant of the effect first found in Rolling Ball Hall, which causes the entire stage to tilt while a giant spike ball chases you. Of course, in this state, Mario can slide on the slopes, which remains true in the earlier version of this effect found in the beta footage. The slide theme from Mario 64 also plays, which is quite fitting. Other than some slight physics differences with slopes and the fact that, well, nothing is chasing you here, then there's not much to say here. The next Wonder effect was completely scrapped from the final game though. In this one, Mario transforms into an 8-bit form, but he gets a big ass head made of bricks, and when you run into obstacles, the bricks break. Not only that, but there are flying chompers trying to eat the bricks as well. This is honestly a very cool Wonder effect, but it does make me wonder, oh son of a bitch, why didn't they do something like this in the final game? Nintendo usually likes to call back to the old retro Mario style, as seen in games like Mario Odyssey, which had those 8-bit segments. It's kind of weird how they didn't do anything like that with the Wonder effects in the final game. Like, imagine if you collect the Wonder Flower and then everything turns 8-bit or hell, even 16-bit. That would have been awesome. I understand that nostalgia pandering wouldn't necessarily fit into Mario Wonder because this game doesn't really have a single thing that was featured in a previous game, but it just seems like a cool cool thing to include. Either A, this wonder effect seen in the beta footage was planned to be in the game, but they decided they wanted to make everything completely unique, so they decided to scrap it, or B, this was just used as a proof of concept of what some of the other wonder effects could look like. And yeah, this is the more likely option for sure. But regardless, I still think this effect had a lot of potential, and I wish we got to see it in the final game. But those weren't all of the scrapped wonder effects. In fact, there are loads more. In the conference, they also showed screenshots of even more cut wonder effects, but we have no footage of them. The ones in the top left and bottom right are actually seen in the final game, but the others were scrapped altogether. This one shows a bunch of giant fire piranha plants shooting fireballs at Mario. If I had to make any guess about why this one was removed, it's because of the singing piranha plant effect seen at the beginning of the game. The next one shows a bunch of maracas? I can't tell what these are, but they're floating in the clouds and Mario can jump and walk all over them. In the bottom left, we can see a giant Goomba that Mario can walk across, but not only that, we can see an actual background this time around. So this is probably a later build of the game. And finally, we have a wonder effect where Mario is surfing a wave. Okay, Nintendo, why isn't this in the final game? Can't even lie, this is way cooler than anything seen in the final game, and that isn't a jab at the final game, it's just that surfboarding in a Mario game sounds and looks awesome. But anyway, even though we'll probably never get our hands on any of these early builds, it's still really neat to think about how different this game was supposed to be at one point in time. I do have to applaud Nintendo for openly showing this stuff off, because they're usually not one to reveal this kind of thing. But unfortunately, this build of the game will likely become lost to time, unless somebody uncovers it somewhere down the line. Hopefully we learn about more unused content in other Mario games as well. But anyway, that's pretty much the gist of all of the beta stuff shown in this presentation. If you all want to see more unused Mario stuff, wonder or not, then please let me know. And be sure to check out the full GDC panel if you're interested. I'll leave links in the description. But that's all for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Goodbye.